Anyway, so this so this afternoon we're gonna have a tutorial, and our tutorial this afternoon is going to be Photoshop layers and masks. So let me look up some royalty-free music. We're gonna have classical music for this. Okay. Okay. So, okay, I got some classical music here, and we're going to have our tutorial this afternoon. So, let's see, what are we gonna use? We need some, let's see, what are we gonna use? I'm gonna look for, here we go. Well, okay, great. So, yes. So, before we start our tutorial, a little bit of a, I mean, we did this last week, but we always have to do it again. The tutorial that we're going to do today is going to be saved and highlighted both on the Twitch channel, and it's going to be uploaded to YouTube. So if you were to, for any reason, to miss the tutorial, you can always watch it later, so don't worry about it. Now, on the other hand, while I'm in the tutorial, I will only answer questions in regards to the tutorial. I will not be answering questions about, like, anything that has nothing to do with the tutorial. I won't be answering questions about, like, how long I've been working in art, or do I have any advice for somebody that's just starting out to draw ears, or something like that. So I will only be answering questions about the topics on the tutorial. So do keep that in mind. Also, I'll probably be a lot less chatty, you know, like with the chat room, because I'll be focused on teaching the tutorial and making sure that all the points in the tutorial are clear. Now, the topic of today's tutorial is actually quite basic, but even for advanced Photoshop users, sometimes you end up learning something that you didn't know. So it's, you know, it's not a bad thing. It's not a completely bad thing, this tutorial. And I do hope that through this tutorial, layers and masks will be something that we have completely dominated and that we have completely under our belt. Now, if you want to suggest a topic for future tutorials, do remember that we do these tutorials every Monday afternoon. And you can suggest topics in the Discord in the Abnormal Growth channel, where you can also post exercises of what you've learned today to like, wait, let me silence my cell phone now that I think of it. Where you can also post, like, exercises of what you did today. Now, let me just silence my cell phone. How do I... New cell phone. Okay, whatever. Also, we are listening to classical music because we need to have music that will not get copyrighted, and therefore we will lose all the audio in the tutorial, making it completely useless. So, are we ready for today's tutorial? Now, the help I need from people in the chat room is that if somebody were to come into the chat room and start asking me questions about stuff that I'm not going to answer, I would ask you the favor to simply let that person know, very gently of course, that I am in the midst of a tutorial and that I can't answer that question at the moment. So that would be it. Okay. Other than that, I hope you all enjoy the tutorial, and, well, here we go. So welcome to our second tutorial in the Ministry of Abnormality Art School. And today we're going to be covering the topic of Photoshop masks, layers, and what you can do with them. Now, Photoshop masks are actually quite simple to handle. And we all are pretty much familiar with them. I mean, if you know even the minimal about Photoshop, you pretty much know the basics about handling layers. You know, you handle them here. They're kind of a way of working with different, well, layers. That sounds pretty stupid. Hello, Con. But the truth is that layers will help you make your work so much more efficient, and will also help you with so many other things that you're going to do. And layers and masking are some of the most fundamental things of how I work. So, how do layers work? Let's just start from the beginning. It's going to be basic, and we're just going to complicate it a little bit more. But nothing that we're going to see today is particularly difficult or complicated. Now, the basic function of a layer, and we're just going to be working very abstract here. The basic function of a layer is that when we got this, we can just make another layer, and we make another layer by simply coming here to the layer, to the layers window and pressing here. Now, you can do that with a command. You can press Ctrl plus Shift plus N. And that will make a new layer. But I don't even like to do it that way, because it brings you to this window that asks you, like, you know, what you want to name it and stuff like that. On the other hand, when you just come here and press here, it just creates it right away. So, you know, I kind of prefer to do it on the directly from the window. But if you need the keyboard shortcut, there you have it. Anyway, so when we have a good couple of layers, we basically get the chance to manipulate them any way we want, one on top of the other, and of course layers will obey order. Alright, I can move one on top of the other. I'm just going to name this one green. Now, of course, naming your layers is a very, very good idea. And right from the start, it's always a good idea to get used to naming your layers. So, naming your layers might seem a little bit tedious and maybe a little bit nerdy, but it's going to help you a lot in the long run. So, you can just organize them by dragging them around and all that kind of stuff. Now, in Photoshop, if you are annoyed about having to come to this window and select every single time you want to grab a new layer, and so on, well, you can always come up here to a part that's covered by the overlay. I'm going to remove it right now. You can always come up here to auto-select. And when you press auto-select, what's going to happen is that where you click, it automatically selects. See what happens when I select the red layer? It immediately selects that one. And see what happens when I go to the green layer? It immediately selects that one. I don't have to be going to the layers to select them each and every time. Now, if you're going to use that, never forget that you have it selected, because we don't normally use that when we're drawing and stuff like that. And it can become quite inconvenient when you want to simply move stuff around normally, and this happens. Also keep in mind that if you have something mildly transparent on top, let's say for example, I have this other layer here, and it's going to be very transparent, like this. Well, when you go to select, it's going to select that layer. So if we have something like transparent or anything like that on top, well, you're going to be selecting those layers instead of selecting the others. So sometimes you just want to deactivate it, and don't forget that you did activate it or deactivated it. So now that I deactivated it, even if I stand here on the red one, since here I have selected the green one, I'll be moving that one. And if I come to the green one, I'll be moving that one. And even if I stand here, I'll still move that one, which would not happen with auto select. Okay, now that's pretty simple. Another thing you can do is show transform controls. Now that's just going to make it that each layer that you select is going to have the little transform tool around it automatically, each and every single time. Now that is not the same as pressing Ctrl T. When you press Ctrl T, you get a bunch of other options. So when you have it this way, you can pretty much resize it automatically without having to do anything. But if you want to do stuff like distort it or warp it or anything like that, you have to press Ctrl T, and then you can access those options. Wait. Then you can access those options. So I don't like using that normally. But I do use auto select a lot. Now, that's just basic stuff. Other basic things about layers. When you want to, this is selecting a layer, just clicking on the layer. But if you want to make a selection that is the layer, then what you're going to do is you're going to go to the layer and press Control click. So look at the hand. Wait, let me just reactivate the overlay. Look at the hand while it's over the layer. And see what happens when I press Control. See how it gets a little selection square? Now that's important, because when you click that, it automatically makes the selection of the layer. I could do it with any of the layers, and it will automatically make the selection of the layer. Now, that is always a great opportunity to remember the basics of selection. Very, very basic things are when you have a selection, you can press Shift plus Control plus I, and that will invert the selection. Now, do keep in mind that you have to press Shift as well. If you just press Ctrl I, what it will do is it will invert the colors. Check it out. I have my red layer here. If I select it, like so, it will select the layer. If I press Ctrl I, sorry, not there, okay. If I press Ctrl I, it will invert the color. If I press Ctrl Shift I, it will invert the selection. See, now it has everything selected except that. And if I press it again, I will have only that selected. So that's basics of selection, right? Okay. So, now, layers relate to each other. And this is very, very important. Now, how do they relate to each other? Well, one of the most basic things we can do with layers is that layers can be linked. What does that mean? Well, I can place this green layer here and this red layer here. And what I can do then is, if I stand in between the two, pay attention to this one. This one is incredibly essential for me. If I stand in between the two layers and press the Alt key, see what happens to the selection tool? What that's going to do is it's going to link the two layers. It's going to link the two layers. If I do that, now the red layer will only appear where the green layer is. And check it out, I can even move it. Right? But it will only appear where the green layer is. Only. Now, the one that is linked will inherit all the aspects of the layer underneath. So, for example, of the base layer, let's call it in this case, the base layer. For example, if I lower the opacity on the base layer, the layer that is linked to it will also lower the opacity. If I unlink it, as you can see, it regains its opacity. So, again, if I link it, it inherits all the values of the base layer. But if I unlink it, it becomes its own thing. This is also going to apply to the different layer effects that we can have. So, if you want to unlink it, all you gotta do is stand there again and press Alt again. Now, do keep in mind that these layers, let's create another one. Why gray? And this one we're going to label blue. Now, do keep in mind that these layers stack. What does that mean? Well, see, I have these layers right here. And if I link red to the base layer, I can also link blue, and they're all going to stack one on top of each other. See that? Now, this stack works in cascade. Basically, if I unlink red, everything that's stacked on top of it is going to unlink as well. On the other hand, if I just unlink blue, it's going to leave the one underneath it alone. So again, remember, we just do that with Alt. Just click there with the Alt key. Now, this is something that you can do for a lot of layers, And eventually you're going to have, let's make another one. Eventually you're going to find that you have so many layers. Let's label this one orange. Stacked there, that it's going to become a little bit difficult to control. Well, fortunately, you can select several layers and group them in a folder. Now you can either press down here the folder, or you can just go Ctrl-G, and you get yourself a folder. If you link a layer in the middle of the pile, it will unlink everything that's on top of it. So, for example, in this case, if I unlink blue, it will unlink blue and orange, but it will leave red alone. See that? In this case, orange is a little bit redder than... There we go. So, as you can see, you can group all the layers, and it ends up with a little triangle here that you can close, so you can have your group and have everything organized. Right? So there you have your group organized, and if you need to deal with it, you can just come and open it here. Now, you can modify this folder. For example, I can modify the opacity on this folder, and it will modify the entire folder. I can also give this folder an effect, any of these effects that we're going to see later what they do, but I can give it and it will give it to everything in the folder. I can also just make the folder disappear. I can also apply these things up here to the folder, but we'll look at those in a minute. Inside the folder, I can move things individually. But I can also move the entire folder. Now this right now we're doing it very abstract, but we're going to see practical applications in drawing in a little while. Now, this is all very, very basic, but very, very useful. So let's see other applications we can do with a layer. Right? Okay, let's just move this over here. So what about these options up here? Well, these are very interesting options, and they're very, very useful. We're going to have this right here. Okay? That's a little bit too intense in color. Let's de-intensify it a little bit. Okay, so we're going to have this. Now, up here, we have these different options. And these different options are very important for what we do with a layer. Now, how do they work? Well, the first option we got right here is a little lock. Well, a lock, right? Now, what that does is it blocks the entire layer. I can now do nothing with the layer. I can't move it. It's going to say that I can't move it because it's locked. I can't paint on it. I can't do anything. Do keep in mind, however, that that doesn't mean that I can't deactivate the layer. I can still deactivate it. And I can still just grab it and erase it. Actually, it's not even letting me. Oh, well, it used to. Great. I used to think it could, but now it can't. But I can deactivate it. There is a certain danger to this, however, and it's that when you block a layer, you tend to assume that everything is safe with that layer. So check this out. I have this other layer. Now let's do this in the other direction. So this is going to be blue spiral. Now, this layer, the orange spiral, is blocked. I can't move it. The blue layer is not. Now, I can fuse layers together. I do that by pressing Ctrl E. Now, if I grab two layers and fuse them, they become one layer, right? I'm going to undo that. But, on the other hand, see that the layer that is blocked, when I fuse them, if I grab the block layer and fuse it to another layer, it loses its blocked property, right? It's no longer blocked. So this one down here is blocked. This one is not. If I merge the two layers, it loses the block. So when you fuse layers, when you merge layers, the layers are going to lose their properties. Keep that in mind. Okay. So, now, let's look at what the other things here do. We can block it. We just saw that. This second one right here is going to block the movement of the layer. If I press this one, I can still paint on it. I can still erase stuff from it. I can still do a bunch of stuff, but I can't move it. I can do anything I want except move it. Now that's very important because a lot of times in Photoshop you move stuff accidentally. So that's going to prevent me from moving it. This third one right here, that's like a little paintbrush, is going to do exactly that. It's going to block me from painting it. So now I can move it. I can erase. Well, actually I can't erase. Okay. I can make selections. I can do a bunch of stuff, but I cannot do anything to modify what is painted. And this final one right here is one that I use a lot. This one is called blocking transparent pixels. And what this one does is that it won't allow me to create anything new on the layer, but it will allow me to modify the stuff that is already there. So if I press this, I can now come here and I can only paint, what is already there. I can't create anything new on the layer, but I can paint what's already there. This is extremely useful, as we will see later on. Blocking transparent pixels. Now I can paint it, but it's blocked. I can't paint anything new. This is going to be very, very useful for coloring. So those are 4 things that we can block on each layer, right? Okay. Now this is a lot of information. And as you can see, there's many different ways to do the same thing. For example, if I wanted, I could have this layer unblocked, select it by pressing Ctrl click on the layer, and paint. Yeah, I could do that. Alternatively, I could block transparent pixels and paint. So, as you can see, there's different ways of achieving the same goal. But one of them, both of them do very different things. For example, if I select it, I can paint different things. But I can expand the selection and paint that. On the other hand, if I have transparent pixels blocked, even if I make a selection, it's still not going to let me paint, even though the selection is there. So, there you see some differences. Now, through linking layers, through grouping layers, through blocking transparent pixels, you can accomplish a lot when it comes to basic drawing in Photoshop. Now, allow me to make a very, very quick demonstration of what I mean. In this case, I'm just going to draw a very, very quick face. Right? Now, with this face, I can, I can have it here on the layers. I'm just going to deactivate everything else. I can have it here. I'm going to name it lines. Underneath it, I can color. So I make a layer underneath it, and I color. Great. Now check out the different things I can do to the coloring and to the line. This is going to be base color, and up here we have lines. Now, for example, in lines, I can block transparent pixels. Once I've blocked transparent pixels, I can make the lines any color I want. Really quite simple. Also, I can do the same with the base color. If I block transparent pixels, coloring will become much easier with transparent pixels blocked. I'm not going to be going outside of the line. I'm not going to have to worry about any of those things. See? Coloring becomes a lot easier this way. And also a lot more enjoyable, well, at least in my opinion. Because suddenly we don't have to worry about, the lines and all that kind of stuff. We can just color it to our leisure. See that? Very, very simple. Now, on the other hand, we can just do it different. What happens if we just have our base color, and instead of coloring that one, we create a new layer, which we're going to call shading, and we will link this layer to the base color. So see how we have 3 layers here? I'm just going to delete all of these. And we have a layer with lines, we have shading, and we have base color. And we link shading to base color. Now what I can do is if I just color shading, it's never going to leave base color. And I can just start working that way. I can start shading that way. Now the whole idea here is that our life is just going to be made so much simpler with these different tools that we have now at our disposal. In this case, we did it a little bit different. We linked the layer. Now, if you look, lines is a different layer, and shading is linked to the base color. Look what happens if I unlink it. See, I colored a lot outside of the base. And here's the base. See? So when I link shading to the base, I get this coloring. And it's going to help me a lot with my coloring. It's going to make coloring so much easier and so much faster. That's what a lot of artists call doing the solids, right? Filling in the solids. When you have line art, you normally make a solid of the entire figure, and then you use that to color more comfortably. So, that's very, very useful when it comes to coloring. But then we're going to have all the different effects that we can do with layers. And that's where things, well, they're not going to get complicated, but we're going to get a lot of possibilities. Now, before I tell you the different possibilities of what we can do with layer effects, do keep in mind that layer effects should be used carefully. Using layer effects too much is very much considered a sign of an amateur. You know, later on in our tutorials, we will learn color theory and stuff like that. We don't need to always be using multiply and stuff like that. But let's see what these do. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some sample strips of color. Let's just... Okay, this one I'm going to create with red. And I'm going to create another one with a saturated red to a desaturated red. Now, look for example at this. I just noticed that I filled in this left strip incorrectly. Right? I just filled it in incorrectly. I filled it in with a radial, I wanted to fill it in with a linear, whatever. Now, making this selection is going to be difficult. So what about if I block transparent pixels? That way I can't paint anything that isn't that. And then I select this area. Once I've done that, it's very, very simple to simply do the fill-in, and that's it. Okay, more. We're gonna make ourselves let's go from one color to the other. So we're gonna go with green to let's say purple. Okay. And finally, what we're going to do is we're just going to grab a photo and we're going to put it there. So I'm just going to grab some landscape photo from Google Images. A very harmless landscape. I mean, nice and pretty, but nothing too special. Just something that has a good variety of colors and stuff. And here we go. We got an image of... Oh, this is some sort of... Okay. There we go. See that? We got ourselves a nice scenery image, and we're just going to put it here. Now, with this, we are going to check what the different layer effects do. Now, layer effects are very, very simple. What layer effects do is they grab the layer on top, and they modify the layer underneath, depending on what parameters there are, comparing the one on top to the one underneath. So it's just going to grab these four strips, it's going to compare them to what's underneath in that photo, and it's going to decide what to do. Now, when we look at these, we're going to have several sections. The first section, normal and dissolve, are pretty simple and straightforward. Now, do keep in mind that as digital painters, there's a lot of these that we're not going to use. Always remember that Photoshop is not a program originally made for digital painting. Photoshop is actually made for photo editing. So a lot of these things are no good to us. They're good for photo editing. So we're not going to use all of these, and don't feel bad about not using all of these. Most of these are for photo editing. So, you know, if you wanna look good with your bikini photo, then maybe you'll need more of those. But here, with what we're painting, we're good. So the first one is normal. Normal is pretty simple. Second one is dissolve. Now look, dissolve is really quite simple in what it does. A lot of times, for a layer effect to show, you have to lower the opacity a little bit. So right now, at 100% opacity, dissolve isn't doing anything. But look what happens when I lower the opacity a little bit. It just does this. It's not really interesting, per se, but I mean, a lot of these things might not have a lot of uses unless, you know, that one time in the future when you suddenly go like, oh, that's exactly what I needed. So it could happen. But, okay, that's dissolve. Now, this first group here is the darken group. And these effects, and see how they're all conveniently grouped? This is the darken group, this is the lighting group, this is the contrast group. And these are like for photos and stuff like that. So, anyway. The first one we're going to look at is darken. Now, darken, let me put it back at 100%. Now, what is darken going to do? Darken is going to grab what is on top and compare it to what is at the bottom. And if, and only if, what is on top is darker than what is at the bottom, it will show up. What that means is that if there's something darker than this at the bottom, it's not going to show up. Let me demonstrate. For example, I have this image. Now, well, let's make it a little bit less extreme. I have this gray, then I have this light gray, then I have this light gray, and I'm gonna grab, I don't know, this other gray right here. And this one I'm gonna put in darken mode. Now look what happens. It shows up. It shows up everywhere. Right? Now I'm gonna lighten it a little bit. And see how as I lighten it, it stops showing up if what's underneath is darker. See that? It only shows up if what is underneath is darker. Sorry, lighter. If this is darker than what's underneath. Oh man, I mixed that up so bad. But yeah, it's only going to show up if what is underneath is lighter. Now this is very interesting because it can also inherit the color properties of what's on top. So if I do this and move it over, as you can see, it's going to now inherit the color properties. Now, why is that useful? Well, I'll show you in a minute when we reach lighten. Or, why not, let's just skip over to lighten. Lighten is the exact opposite of darken. What lighten is going to do is, well, if darken looks at what is underneath, and if what is on top is darker, it shows it. What lighten does is, it looks at what is underneath, and if it's, you know, if what's on top is lighter, it shows it. See that? It only shows it if it's lighter. Now, this is a little bit of a very interesting thing that Photoshop can do, because Photoshop can actually simulate the properties of both ink and light. Now, how does that work? Now, we all know that the colors of light, as in the colors that the human eye is able to see, are Captain Maho, thank you for hosting. R, G, B. And we all know that these are the colors that the human eye can see. Red, green, and blue. Now, when we are printing, it changes a bit. We got cyan, we got yellow, we got magenta, and we got black, which doesn't really count, but okay. Let's just put it there. Now, check this out, because this is something very interesting that Photoshop does. Now, the colors of RGB are the colors of light. So, if we were to grab from here and just tell it to, like, give me pure 100... Actually, this is 250... What? It's 256, is it? Yeah. Oh, it's 255. Okay. This is pure light, as in made of light, red. I'm going to do that also with the green. And I'm going to do that also... Well, I should do it in another layer. And I'm going to do that also with the blue. Now, check this out. I'm going to do it also with CMYK, now that we're here, right? So, now that we're here in CMYK, I'm just going to... Oh, shit, I didn't put it in another layer. Okay, let's just... Bam, okay. I'm going to put these here. RGB. Okay. Now we're going to do the CMYKs. So, I just grab it from here. Cyan. Oh, damn it. Okay. Again. There we go. Pure cyan. Pure magenta. And pure yellow. I'm making a very big mistake here, by the way. These are actually supposed to go here, and these are actually supposed to go here. So let me just invert this. Now we're going to see this with a lot more focus when we're looking at color theory. Today we're looking at layers and masks. But this is just an interesting thing that Photoshop can do with layers and masks. Now check this out. When you are working with RGB, you are working with the colors of light. So, think about light for a minute. What is light? Well, if we look at it in a very simplistic way, you have dark, and then there's light. And that's how we see things. So when we're going to do RGB, we have to put it in a black background. Because that's dark, and this is light. Now look what happens if we make these lighten. Right? Look what happens if we make this layer of colors on the black background lighten. They're gonna stay as light. But here's what happens that's really interesting. Look what happens if I move them over each other. Photoshop actually is capable of simulating what happens with actual light by using the lighten filter. As you can see, it's mixing RGB colors as if they were light. So when I move green on top of these, you can see that he's mixing them as if they were light. This is called additive color. Additive color. And what additive color means is that we are adding more and more light. Now, if we do this with CMYK, we have to do it on a white background, because that's what ink does on paper. Paper is white, and you're covering it with ink. You're actually making it reflect less light. So, when we have CMYK on top of a white background, we have to put it in darken. And it's gonna be the same when we put these in darken and we start moving them around. Check it out. just like ink in a printer. Yes, of course, we're going to be saving this video later on, and it's also going to be on YouTube. Check this out. By using lighten and darken, I can simulate how color behaves with light and how color behaves with ink on a printer. Also interesting to notice is that RGB, red, green, and blue, when we mix them, we get cyan, magenta, and yellow. And when we mix cyan, magenta, and yellow, we get RGB. Red, blue, and green. Now that actually doesn't mean anything, you know, that last thing I just said is of absolutely no use. These are the colors of light. RGB are the colors of light. CMYK are the colors in a printer. And the ones you probably learned in school, which were red, yellow, and blue, those are pigment colors, which you use with paints. That's totally different. So anyway, when we have these two things, we can start thinking about how different colors behave and use layers to an advantage that way. How? Let's say, for example, that you have just a person standing there. This is just going to be a head. Right? We have ourselves a head. And you want to shade this head. Right? You just want to shade it. Well, if you put a layer on top of it and linked it, and then put that layer in darken, you could add the color of the shadow and simply by lowering the opacity a little bit, you're gonna get the color that the skin should be with that shadow. So it's gonna make lighting and shading so much simpler. Suddenly you're getting the resulting color that you should have with light. This would be the actual color of the skin if confronted with that color of light. Because you use it in darken. Or you can alternatively, you know, use it in lighten, but, you know, that's not going to do anything. You can just use it in darken and it's going to mix. Okay, back to where we were. So, again, darken is going to grab the layer on top, compare it to the layer beneath it, and only let it show if it's darker. And it's also going to inherit the color properties. Now, if we move to the next one, multiply, which is a very popular one. A lot of people use multiply. What multiply is going to do is it's going to grab the layer on top, see how dark it is. It's going to grab the layer at the bottom, see how dark that is, and it's just going to mash them together and make it like double dark. This time it doesn't matter if the layer on top is lighter or darker or whatever. It's just going to grab the darkness and add it to the one underneath. So there you go. That's multiply. The opposite of multiply is screen. Screen does the exact opposite. Screen is going to grab how light the layer on top is and how light the layer at the bottom is, and it's going to mash those two together and make it lighter. So darken, multiply, lighten, and screen are the four basics of darkening and lightening in Photoshop. Now, of course, we have other options, but most of them are going to be very, very, very specific things that, you know, you just explore when you need them. Except color dodge. Color dodge is, well, it's awesome. Now, what does color dodge do? Color dodge grabs the light and it multiplies it a lot more. It burns it. So, check this out. When you have a layer, you can fill it in with black and put it in color dodge. As you see, it does nothing. But then, when you come in with a color, say for example this one, you can really kind of blow up the colors underneath it. Now, right there, what I'm doing looks pretty awful. But if you have the appropriate brush... No, not that one. If you have the appropriate brush and the appropriate color, it's great for making fire. But that's very, very specific. You know, that's extremely specific. But still, there it is. Okay. Now, the others we're really not going to use much, but never be afraid to just experiment with them and see what happens. So we're just going to skip over to overlay. And overlay is a fascinating layer effect, because when you work with overlay... No, that's no good for making smoke. Overlay, what is overlay? Overlay is multiply and screen in one. What overlay does is that it grabs, if it's darker, it multiplies, if it's lighter, it screens. And as you can see here, that's what it does. If it's darker, it multiplies, if it's lighter, it screens. Overlay does both. Here's a very interesting thing. If we grab a layer, right here, and we fill it in with 50% gray, I'm just gonna... We fill it in with 50% gray, and we put it in overlay, nothing happens. Why? Because overlay, if it's dark, like from 50% up, dark, it darkens. It multiplies, I'm sorry. If it's from 50% down, it lightens. But 50 is neither one nor the other. So overlay doesn't do anything with it. See? Overlay does nothing with gray. It can't. It's neither dark nor is it light. It's just 50% gray. Now, the others are going to be variations of these. And normally it's just a good idea to kind of experiment with them a little bit. The important one here is overlay. So let's jump all the way down. We're going to skip these. These are very much for photography. We're going to skip all the way down to these four, which are, again, very useful. Now let's go to luminosity. Now look at these here. We got hue, saturation, color, and luminosity. What these are going to do is they're going to grab the information on that specific thing and discard all the rest. For example, look at it normal. There you have it. Normal. Okay? Now, what happens if we press luminosity? It discards information regarding everything else and just makes whatever's underneath have the luminosity of what is on top. I should do something here for better examples. I'm gonna grab this. Bam, bam. There we go. That should give us a better view. When we do luminosity, it just grabs the luminosity of whatever's on top and makes whatever is underneath have that luminosity. It doesn't grab any color. It doesn't grab any information. Look, for example, here. This is green. When I put it in luminosity, the green is lost. It doesn't care about the color. It only cares about the luminosity. On the other hand, if I grab color, it just grabs the color. No luminosity, no saturation, no nothing. It just grabs the color. Look, for example, at this stripe right here. It had no color. It was just gray. So whatever's underneath it, if I put it in color, is going to become no color. And look here, the one that went from purple to green. It doesn't matter if it's darker, it doesn't matter if it's lighter. If I put it in color, all it's going to do is give what's underneath the color of what's on top. A much better example are these two strips. See how they go from black to white? Well, here's something for you to argue with your friends at a party. You can beat that annoying son of a bitch. Black and white are not colors. They're not. Well, maybe they're a color that you have in your color box or with your crayons or something like that. But when it comes to light, black and white are not colors. There's no such thing as the color black. There's no such thing as the color white. Black and white are values. They're luminosity. Black is the darkest we can get. White is the lightest we can get. They're not colors. Look at the image. When we put it in color, this whole bar just becomes one bar without color. It doesn't get less color where there's white and more color where there's black. No. Black and white are not colors. So that's what color does. Now, check this out. It becomes very useful if, for example, we were to say, okay, look, I got this entire image. So what I'm going to do is, let's grab a color. Let's grab this purple. Fill it in. So sorry. We're going to fill it in. And we're going to make it color. Now, the image is just purple. It's the same image with all the same luminosity, all the same stuff, but purple. Now that looks a little bit extreme. If we start combining these things with the percentage of opacity, things start to get a little different. See, now it's not so exaggerated. Now we suddenly got that it doesn't look wrong. It just kind of changed the temperature a little bit. We had this, now we have this. A layer with purple, lower the opacity, put it in color. Suddenly it doesn't look that bad. Now we can actually do it with two colors. How about if we go, okay, I want to go from this orange to this purple, like that. Put it in color, and then lower the opacity. Suddenly, you've changed a little bit the whole temperature of the image. It's a lot colder on the left side, a lot warmer over here. See that? It starts working in very different ways. You start being able to change the temperature of your image. Very, very useful. So that's what color does. Now, saturation is again going to discard all the information of color. It's going to discard all the information of luminosity, and it's just going to go for saturation. Now, said in a very non-formal way, saturation in color is how intense that color is. So it's just going to grab what's underneath and make whatever is underneath have the intensity of what was on top. So in this case, you can see it right there. Admittedly, I don't ever really use this. But hey, it exists. It's a thing. If I have a black and white drawing painting and want to have the color I want, then I place a layer with color on top of the black and white and use the color. Yes, Helimarja, that's exactly what you do, but it's gonna need a little bit of tweaking. And if you want, we'll try that in a minute. It's gonna need a little bit of tweaking, but we'll try it with this image in a minute. Okay, finally, let's look at hue. Now, hue is just going to change the colors, but it's going to, have very different results. See, like, when we add hue, it's not going to modify stuff that doesn't have color. It's only going to modify stuff that already had the color on it. When I do color, see how it colors the cloud anyway? When I do hue, it only colors where the color already was. Now, those are layer filters. And why did I close Photoshop? Did I close Photoshop one? Okay. No big deal. No big deal. Nothing lost. Nothing lost. Okay, let me just grab another image. Oh! It recovered it. Photoshop crashed. We didn't even notice. Okay. Okay, now check out what's going to happen if we grab this image and remove all the color. Okay, so now we have this image in black and white, and we want to color it. Now there's several things we can do. For starters, we can just put a layer on top, put it in color mode, and yeah, effectively, we're going to be able to color it. Like so. Now the results look weird. They do. So how about we put it in hue? Doesn't do anything. Because like I said before, hue will only modify the color of something that already had color. So, doesn't work. You have to put it in color. But it looks weird. So how about we lower a little bit the opacity, and then we make another one and we put that one in multiply. It starts to look a little bit more natural. It requires a lot of experimentation, but there's more stuff we can do. For example, we can grab a layer underneath and color there. Then, the layer with the black and white, we can put it in multiply. And it's going to have the color underneath, but it's going to get a little dark. So, I mean, there is that. So we'll just make sure that we have a white. Okay, there you go. Huh. Let's see what else we can do. We can put it in darken. It's going to give me weird results. But still. I can start coloring this way. It's going to look weird though. So there's many different things that you can do to color, right? Normally what you're going to do is you're going to experiment a little bit and you're going to mix. Now there's something I like to do when I'm going to color, but it's a little bit more tricky. But I'm going to teach you how to do it. I've done this many times on the stream before, and it's a little bit aside from the whole layers and masks thing. And I don't think we're going to have time to cover masks today, so we're just going to cover masks next week. We're going to leave it at layers today. But one of the things I like to do a lot when I have a black and white image is I like to separate the black from the white. And it's actually quite easy to do. Now, I'm going to grab this image that I got right here. And this has a lot of uses, okay? So I'm going to grab this image that I have right here. It's black and white. If you have doubts on if it is entirely black and white, all you got to do is press Ctrl-Shift-U. And that removes all the color information. We need to have it that way. Then, check out what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to Window, Channels. That opens the different channels. Red, green, and blue. I'm going to press Ctrl-Click on the RGB channel. Now, what did that select? That selected all the white in the image. Now, the selection looks a little bit weird. And the reason the selection looks a little bit weird is because, remember before that I told you that Photoshop uses the information of how dark something is for overlay? Like if it's from 50% up dark, it's gonna multiply. If it's from 50% down, it's gonna screen. Well, Photoshop does something very similar to show selections. If something is 50% up dark, Photoshop shows me the selection line. If something is 50% down dark, Photoshop actually doesn't show me the selection line. But it still makes the selection. Allow me to demonstrate. We're going to have black. We're going to have a little bit less black. We're going to have a little bit less black. We're going to have a little bit less black. Now, I'm sorry, I just mixed up. It's not with the darkness, it's with the opacity, okay? So, look, we're going to have black. And I'm going to make the opacity on this vary from here to there. See? Now, look what happens when I have this with different opacity right there. Look what happens when I tell Photoshop to make the selection. See how it only shows the selection right to the middle? It did actually select the entire image. See? I can still paint over here. It's just that Photoshop doesn't show me the selection if it's 50% or less transparent. So, keep that in mind when you're making selections in Photoshop. Sometimes when you make a selection by pressing Ctrl-click on a layer, it's not going to show you the entire selection, because in Photoshop, if it's at 50% transparency or lower, it's not going to show you the selection. So, when we come here and we play that game, and we tell it, okay, select RGB, it selects all the white, right? Wait, let me see that I'm on the layer that I should be. Okay, I am. Okay, so I'm going to tell him. Control-click on the RGB, and that selects all the white. Now, again, it looks weird, but that's because of what I just told you. So I'm going to come here to the layers. Now I'm just going to make a new selection. A new layer, sorry. A new layer. Look what happens if I decide to fill it in. Now, a nice shortcut for filling in is pressing Alt Backspace. So, Alt Backspace. Bam. It fills in all the white. Without any of the information on the dark. Only the white. Let's fill it in with a nice cold color. There we go. Now, remember I taught you before how to invert a selection? So, what about if we create a new layer, invert the selection, and fill it in with, I don't know, whatever color. This one. See that? We have separated the black from the dark in this image. Now check this out. This goes all the way back to what we did at the beginning. Now what happens if I grab this layer that has only the dark parts of the image? The rest is transparent. And I come up here to what I showed you at the beginning of the tutorial and block transparent pixels. That means I can now paint the image. Oops, sorry. That means I can now paint the image without ever painting the light parts. See that? I can come and grab another color and paint it here. It respects the transparency, all that kind of stuff. And the reason it respects the transparency is because I blocked transparent pixels. Underneath, I have the light, and I can still activate it. I can make it white if I want. I can block transparent pixels as well. See that? So there's many different ways of coloring things. Now, all this adds together. With what? With selections and with masks. Now, masks is a very small topic, and I think I have enough time to cover it today. So that was layers up until this point. Now let's see what masks do, and then we're going to fuse them together and see what we can do with both layers and masks. And that's where the real magic happens. Now, masks are very simple. The concept of masks is very simple. Let me just erase everything that we have. So, when you have an image, let's say, for example, you have this image. What is a mask? A mask is something that you put over the image so that you might decide what parts of the image are going to show and what parts will not. So think of a mask as if whatever is white in the mask is going to show what's underneath. And whatever is black in the mask is going to hide it. That is a mask. A mask is simply something where white is going to show and black is going to hide. That's a mask. Right? Now, how do we use a mask? Well, the first thing we would do is we would apply a mask. We're just going to have that. Okay? So, how do we apply a mask? Check it out. We come down here to this part, and we're going to tell it, this is the mask button. When we press this, it's going to apply a mask to the layer that we have selected. So, check out, I'm going to press here, and you guys check out what's going to happen here. Bam. It immediately creates a mask. Now, as you can see, right here, the mask is, it shows me like a miniature version of the mask. And this is where it becomes, this is where most people crash. But it's such a simple thing. Check it out. When you're on a mask, you only work with black and white. Now, check out that I can actually edit the layer by clicking on it. And see how it has little selection brackets around it? Well, I can select the mask, or I can select the layer. Mask, layer. And each one, I will edit a different thing. If I'm on the layer, I'll just edit the layer. But check out the colors. I'm going to remove... as far as I know, Vaughn, no. But there's a very quick way to change it. Okay, now, check it out. When I'm on a mask and I create a new mask, the mask automatically defaults to a full mask in full white, meaning that it shows everything. Well, it's very easy to convert it right away to black. All you gotta do is press Ctrl-I. Ctrl-I will invert anything. So, the inverse of white is black. If I'm on a mask that is full white and press Ctrl-I, it goes full black. And as you can see up here, the miniature little image of the mask becomes black. Now, when you're on a mask, check out the colors here on the left side of the screen. I'm gonna remove my camera so you guys can see. Well, actually, I just need to remove the overlay. Check out here. See how right here are my colors? When I'm on the layer, I got the actual colors that I'm working with. See them right there? Green and kind of purple. If I move to the mask, that is immediately going to become black and white. Because masks don't use color. Masks only use black and white. And as I explained before, white makes stuff appear, black makes stuff disappear. So, if I'm here on the mask, and I press Ctrl-I, everything is black. And all I gotta do is grab my brush, and alternate between black and white to make stuff appear and disappear. So for example, here I have white selected. If I paint with white on the mask, it shows me things. If I paint with black, it hides them. It hides them. Now, right now, check out the thumbnail. The thumbnail actually shows me the mask, and it's very easy to understand there. You can see on the thumbnail how white is what shows me stuff, and black is what hides it. Now, I use this so much. And the reason I use it so much is because I use it for drawing. Now, how do I do that? Well, imagine that I decide that the color of my pencil is, for example, this one. Well, if I apply a mask to this and invert, I now have a layer where I can just draw And I can erase by simply pressing X. If I press X, whatever color I have selected is gonna, it's gonna switch places with the foreground color and the background color. So I have white here. Underneath I have black. If I press X, it changes them. See here on the left. See there? Just by pressing X. So with white, I can draw. With X, I can switch over to black and remove. Suddenly, drawing became a very, very different experience for me, because now I can not only draw with what I do there, I can remove lines just as easy, and drawing becomes so much more simpler. For me, of course. It might, results may vary. But suddenly I can remove lines, I can play with the lines, I can do so much more. It becomes so much more dynamic for me to draw this way. Now, instead of filling up with color and applying a mask, what I do is I use something called an adjustment layer. Now, when I do an adjustment layer, what I do is I come here and I select the one that's right next to the masks. This one that is two circles. Well, actually, it's a circle cut in half. Right here. When you open that and you go to solid color, it immediately just lets you select the color that you want. And it automatically creates a color fill with a mask. And then all you gotta do is invert, and you can draw however you want with the mask. Now, the advantage of using this, which is called an adjustment layer of color fill, is that if you double click on the color, it allows you to change the color to whatever you want. Now, when does this become useful? Well, this becomes very, very useful when you're drawing and you're shading. How so? Well, imagine this. I use this layer for, just to draw this. Underneath, I'm going to create a fill. And I'm going to fill it up with a color. What color? I don't know, any color. Let's just, oops, sorry. I'm just going to fill it up with this color. Now, as we will see, I'm so sorry. I have to answer the phone. Oh, shit, I hate this interruption. ¿Aló? Hola, padre. Ah, bien, bien, aquí trabajando. Ah, bueno. Listo, man. Está bien. Sí, no, y no lo vale. Entonces, ah, bueno. No te sé eso. No, yo hablé con mi madre esta mañana y cuadré con ella. Hey. Eso me contó mi madre, sí. Sí. Pues. Sí, a mí también se me dañó el mío este fin de semana. Pero pues no perdí información, pero se me dañó. No, se le dañó un módulo de memoria. La memoria no, lo logré volver a poner a funcionar, pues me va a tocar reemplazar las partes. Carajo. Bueno. ¿Y qué? ¿No te ofrecieron garantía? Bueno. De la información. Ya. Caramba. Bueno. Bueno. Listo, pues dale. Bueno, dale. Entonces esta semana nos vemos allá. Bueno, pues. Hasta luego. Okay, I am so sorry to interrupt that tutorial, but there's no way I'm not going to answer my father on the phone. Anyway, okay, so where was I? Okay, so I used a color fill layer to make the line. Underneath, I made simply a solid. Now, as we're going to see later when we check out color theory, shadows are not just darkness. Shadows are a color. So, we're going to apply a shadow to this. So let's say, oh, okay, my shadow is going to be, we're going to be outside. We're going to be outside in the day. So I'm going to create a color fill with blue. Because when you're outside, your shadows tend towards blue. Now, check out how I'm going to apply basically everything that we did today. Now I'm going to link this layer to the layer underneath. So now it's only applying to that. See, when I link it. Then, I'm going to convert it to, let's say, darken. Lower the opacity a little bit, so it lets the other color through. Then I'm going to come to the mask, invert, and now I have a very, very simple way of shading without much fuss. Now, the great advantage of this is that if I were to decide to change the circumstances, it becomes very easy. A blue shadow is indicative of somebody that's outside, because the sky is blue. But what happens if we go inside and suddenly the shadows are, I don't know, brown, because we're inside a wooden house or something? Well, all I have to do is come here and change the color to something brown. It's a very subtle change, but it says a lot in terms of color theory. I can do the same with the light. Let's say that I'm going to add a light. I'm going to make it, almost white, yellowish white. I'm going to put it in lighten. Lower the opacity a little bit. And there you go. This is we're outside, underneath the great blue sky, and the sun is shining on us. Everything is beautiful. There you go. Well, what happens is suddenly I decide, no, you know what? We're going to go inside where the walls are made of wood and are brown, and the light is a candle. It's going to be an orange light. It's going to be a candle light. Suddenly, the whole circumstances of the image change a lot. And we change it that way. Outside, inside. So you can do that very easily by just using all the stuff that you learned today. All you got to do is know how to link layers properly, how to properly handle masks, and what filters to choose. That's it. And then you can just grab it all, group it. Forco, thank you for following. You just grab it all, group it, and that's it. You got yourself. Now, what I'm going to do to end this tutorial is I'm going to show you one of my images checking this out. We're going to look at one of my images, and we're going to check out how this is applied in one of my normal images. Let's just grab... okay, here we go. Now, normally I'm a very messy artist, but check out how this works, okay? So, first, I made a sketch. And as you can see, I made the sketch right here with a color fill layer, right? This is a color fill layer. So I use that because it makes sketching so much faster. I can just draw and draw and draw, and flipping with the key button between black and white, I can just sketch very freely. Okay? So, what happens next? Let me just deactivate layers here, so I can show you what I did. So, I choose another solid layer to make the lines. No, that's not it. Where is it? I have to find it first. There we go. I make the other solid layer to make the lines. And as you can see, check out what I did here. I made the lines, right? I just made the lines. And underneath, I made another solid layer, this one. And made the solid. After that, I created up here a solid layer for the shading. And I linked them. I mean, I'm linking a bunch of stuff that I have underneath, but okay. You know. I just linked the shades. See, right here you have the illumination, all that kind of stuff. It's very simple. I made one layer for the lines, one layer for the shades, and one layer for just the silhouette, the solid silhouette. Link the shading to the silhouette, there you go. The shading is a solid color layer, so I can make it whatever color I want. There you go. So much simpler. Okay. Then, I do the same thing with other layers, like solid layers for color, and all that kind of stuff. I just start piling on top. Of course, this requires you to know a lot about color theory and all that kind of stuff, but I mean, you can learn this later in another tutorial. Now, as you can see, I have all these layers for lighting and shading and stuff like that on top. Underneath them, I start putting in the color. And everything is linked. Everything is linked to the base, to the silhouette base. And I just start adding colors to it. And that's more or less how I work. Later on, I add more stuff. But we're going to see that in future tutorials. Right? We'll just see that in future tutorials. Now, a lot simpler, I'll show you a much, much, much simpler version of this with my subscriber pile. I'm just waiting for it. Okay, look at the subscriber pile. Let's just look at an image like, for example, any one of them. Here you go. Check out how it works. It's actually quite simple. Let's just remove what we don't need. Okay. So, I'm going to remove what I don't need and show you how I make any one of these images. First, I have a solid color layer here for the sketches. Bam. There I go. I make this sketch. Then, I have a solid color layer right here that I make for the lines. Bam. There you go. It works with a mask. Simple. Show you how to do that. Then I have another one, exactly the same color, but on top, so I can make the thick lines. Bam. At this point, I don't need the sketch anymore. Just deactivate it. Okay. So here, I have a layer that is the color base. Bam. There you go. That's the coloring. It's solid. You can see it right there. It's underneath the lines. And then, as you can see, all these layers are linked on top of this one. We got one layer for shading. This one, this purple layer, is for shading. And as you can see, it's with darken. Right here. This layer is for lighting. Another solid color layer for lighting. It's an overlay. I have this other layer here for some highlights. And the rest are just additional layers that I've been adding case to case. Now, what do I accomplish with this? Well, what I accomplish with this is that all the images are coherent with each other. Because all the images have shades that tend towards purple. Which makes all the images feel like they're all in the same place. Now, I always add shading and lighting on top of the colors. But that doesn't necessarily have to be the way it's always done. As we will see in future tutorials, there's other ways to color, of course. But this way of organizing things is pretty much my basic workflow for a basic image like this one. See? No lines, no effects. Now, if you look at any one of my PSD files, you will find monstrous layer organization. Like, it will be, let me just show you a more complicated image. Like, for example, from latest commission. Let's open, no wait, this is not it. Let's open this image. It's going to take a while to open. If you look at the layers, it's going to be hell. It's going to be insane, and my computer is wanting to die. Okay, so we got this image. Now look at the layers for this image. It's a mess. It's a huge mess. And here's lighting. And here's, I don't even know what this was. What was this? Ah, here was the lights of this place. And everything is like, I can remove the lighting, and I can remove the lines, and I have everything grouped and all that kind of stuff. Now, this is hell unless you're me. And when I say unless you're me, I don't mean unless you're me because I'm awesome. No, I mean unless you're me because I made it. I made it. I know my own process. I made all these layers, so all the mess that is in here, I'm familiar with it. I made this, so I know where everything is, and I know what I did. These things are going to become very, very, very messy and very tangled and very, very, very mixed up, but it's your image, so you're going to be able to know what you're doing. Just remember to label your layers and group them. And that takes me to one final piece of our tutorial before we finish, and it's that you can label layers, as in double-click them and change the name. You can group them by pressing Ctrl-G, which we already saw. And there's another thing that you don't see much of in Photoshop, and I never do it, but I should, really. If you come to a layer on the eye, and you press right-click on the eye, you can actually change the color of the layer right there. See? Now, the eye is purple, right here. It's a very, very, very little thing, but it's going to help a lot to organize what you're doing. See that? You can actually change the colors of things here. Now, if you are the type of person that is obsessed with order, then you will name all your layers, you will group them all properly, and you will be coloring these eyes, which I'm amazed a lot of people don't know that Photoshop can do that you can actually just change the color of these eyes. See, normally they have no color, but this would help you organize your stuff a lot. If you have a big project, you could just use this to kind of classify things on your file, and that would help a lot. Now, before we finish, if for any reason this doesn't look like it does for me, let me just open something else. Okay, this one is nice and small. Okay, if for any reason your layers don't look like mine, don't panic. That doesn't really mean anything. There's many different ways that Photoshop can show you the layer thumbnails and stuff like that. Maybe your Photoshop is showing the thumbnails larger. Maybe your Photoshop is showing the thumbnails smaller. So, what do you do? You just come up here, press there, and now what you're going to do is come down here to where it says Panel Options. There, Photoshop is going to give you the choice of if you want to have your thumbnails medium, large, small, or just nothing there. If I go nothing, see? Now it's not going to give me any thumbnails. If you come here, Panel Options, Large, that's going to give me super large thumbnails. I wouldn't use that, but I can think of situations where people would want that. You can come here, Panel Options, have it medium. Or, in my case, I keep them small. But if Photoshop is not showing you those, you can adjust them from there. Also, another option is that here, you can tell it that the contents of the thumbnail be either what's on the layer or the entire document. That will make it that so that each thumbnail either is showing the entire image or just what's in the thumbnail. See? If I do layer bounds, this thumbnail changes quite a bit. In the case of this image, just to finish, I made line work here. Underneath, I added the colors. Here, I added the shading. And just a little bit of light, and that's it. So, for now, that concludes our tutorial on layers and masks. And I hope it was useful to you, and I hope you will get some benefit from it. As always, you can check out our Discord, where we have a section called Abnormal Growth. And if you want to maybe do some exercises and show them or ask for advice or ask for corrections or anything like that, please feel free to go there and post your exercises. Also, don't forget that last week we had a tutorial on clothing. I haven't decided what the theme for next week, I haven't decided what the subject for next week is going to be, but as always, if you have ideas for a subject for a tutorial, you can go to Abnormal Growth in our Discord and post suggestions right over there. Also, if you want to play around with the PSD files of my art, you can always join my Patreon right up there. There's a link to my Patreon. You can join my Patreon where whenever I make images that are like just my images, I post on Patreon the PSD files. So you can play around with them. Do be warned, they're all pretty much as messy as the one I showed you before. So there is that. And if you like this tutorial, please follow the channel or maybe even consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned. And now I need to just do something to indicate that this tutorial is over for when I am